Okay, we're live for the 43rd edition, I believe, of the Data Value Show. Today's show is going to provide more value than normal, I think, if you use Snowflake. So we're going to be talking about tuning the Snowflake Data Cloud. We've got Andrew Carruthers from London Stock Exchange. He's here to talk about his books that he's written. I think he's on his third one now. So without further ado, let's bring him on.
Great. Hi. Thanks, Chris.
Hi, Andrew. So I always like to start with a bit of an introduction of where I met the guests, because to get on the show, I've always met these people from some place or another, and we had the pleasure of meeting at Big Data London, I believe, was the first time. And we were trying to put together some of the home truths around it. And I think we were chatting about Lauren Ballack, I think, was the other conversation, some of her views, which I saw last week actually. I was out with her and Alex Dean. That's a whole other story that we'll take offline, Andrew. But yeah, would you like to give yourself an introduction and a bit of background about yourself?
Sure. Well, as you can see, I'm Andrew Carruthers. I am a director at the London Stock Exchange Group. I am working on the Snowflake distribution. So what that means really is, at the moment, it's the last mile data product delivery. So we have a whole bunch of curation engines. We ingest data, we curate the data, and then we distribute it into Snowflake. Prior to that, I built the corporate data cloud, which is all the internal operational data, bringing it together into a single platform for a single view of our operational information. And prior to that, 27 years in Oracle. So, or working with Oracle. So, yeah, quite a history.
We were just reminiscing just before in the back room about the good old Oracle days. So I learned a lot of my stuff on Oracle, and I think we were just saying a minute ago, a lot of it's still relevant, and transferable to the Snowflake Data Cloud, but not everyone has those skills. So I believe that's probably one of the reasons you wrote your book.
Yeah, so when I started in Snowflake about 4.5 years ago, there were no books in the marketplace, and really it was kind of Snowflake 1.0 with a few features, which, I mean, it was a lovely product to work on, very easy to get to grips with, compared to now, where it's a mega product. But there was nothing that I could pick up and walk through step by step. That's what that means. This is how I do such and such. And just give some core principles, if you like, and build up some patterns from the start, and start to address a broad range of subjects that I'd found interesting or challenging on my journey. And how it all happened was Jonathan Gennick, who was at A-Press at the time, he pinged me and said, "Hey, Andy, are you into Snowflake?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you want to write a book?" And I went, "Yeah, all right then." So as with all great ideas, what could possibly go wrong? And you find yourself some 6-8 months later with a book in your hands that you've written, but it's taken an awful lot of time to get there. But I write the books, or have written the books, because they're the books that I wanted when I was investigating different aspects of Snowflake, which after a week, when I had the book in my hand, I thought, I'm a bit bored. I'll put a proposal in for another book, which was Maturing the Snowflake Data Cloud. And that's much more about what we call a landing zone experience. So when you acquire Snowflake in an organization, you should build a platform for a common expression of that platform within your organization, and then build your apps on top of that. And of course, the last book probably doesn't need a great deal of introduction, because the title says it all. But it's all about performance tuning and what I've learned in the intervening months and years.
I'm just putting in the chat anyway. So the first book you've written, I've just put there, but unfortunately the link didn't give the description. So,
right.
But yeah, so I'll put the other ones up there in a minute. So I mean, how long ago was the first book you wrote then?
It's about 500 odd pages, and it takes about an hour a page. But when you write it, the template it's in it's 9-point font. 330 pages submitted. By the time it's expanded and typeset, it comes out about 500 pages.
Yeah.
It takes about 6 to 8 months to write a book.
Yeah.
It's not just the writing of the book, it's also the technical review of the book, the feedback, etc., etc. So budget's about 10% of the time for feedback. But as you progress through the books, that becomes less because you've got to develop your writing style. And I have to say that, Jonathan, if you're on this or watching this, thank you so much for helping me out with my first chapter in the first book, because that really helped me set the tone for the narrative going forward. I couldn't have wished for a better editor.
That's really good. I think when I've been trying it in the background, writing one book, but it's a background activity. But the two books I have helped on, and that was more from a technical reviewer. And I suppose one is more like one was on A-Press actually as well, when it was Snowflake Security, written by Ben Hersberg, if I pronounced his surname correctly.
It's on my shelf.
Yeah, and okay, and that one you're right. I mean, the technical validation of what was going in there is that what myself and actually the other two co-founders of Lead Data, Chris Edge and Ian Totiku, we all helped on it. Yeah, that takes up a lot of time, and that's quite critical, because you don't want something to go out which isn't actually going to work or come up with an error. So your diligence on there is it takes a lot of time. But interesting about the writing style, because this is something that I'm trying to nail myself. So what can you explain a bit more about the writing style? Is that when you say, is it like a consistent way or a way of telling the story? So what's involved in creating a style?
That's a really good question. So when my first hack at writing a chapter, it was much more read like a military instruction manual. Do this, do that, do something else. Actually, that's not what people want to read. People want to read an engaging story as to why. Why do they want to do something? And if you can start with why, borrowing from Simon Sinek, who incidentally is just brilliant, and I do reference him in the books.
Okay.
But start with why, and then you can start to explain the story as to how you get to the end point. So I take a thematic approach and say, here's a topic that I want to explain. And more recently, it's been a case of sometimes I have a false start. So I'll write something, I'll get 2 or 3 pages in, and I haven't got much hair left to tear out, but I just have to stop and go back to the beginning and just say, what's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the end, and how do I tell that story? And over time, through repeat exercise, you find that there's a pattern emerges. We start with this thing, then we do something else, then we do another thing. And this is why we're doing this thing, because it will help us later on, but we don't explain the later on bit there. We then move on and then build up. So I've also found it very cathartic and therapeutic, because I think we all suffer a bit from, have I got anything really important to say? Who's going to read this nonsense, But the truth of the matter is that when I've written the stuff and I read it back, I actually really liked what I'd written. Now, that, without being arrogant, because I don't think I'm that kind of person, it made sense to me. No, but it made sense to me, and I thought, if I like my own stuff, that's probably the measure or the standard that I want to be able to take to other people. And what follows from that is being able to have confidence in what you've written and to be able to teach others. So just as an aside, I run a Snowflake boot camp on a Sunday morning for a couple of hours for some people that I know locally, right?
Oh, wow.
And that tests you, because you've got to know your stuff, right?
I've always find right away, mine's more from the posting and things like that. But if I've posted something or written something, it's referenceable. Then I can have an idea about it, but it's not a really refined idea or a complete until I've actually written it out. Then it's locked in my memory. I can always refer back to it, and then or most of them anyway, depending on what time of the night they are. But it's good to thrash out your ideas and actually validate them as well. Especially if you're having reviewers that are reviewing it with your book, but comments there. So I suppose I want to focus on the tuning the Snowflake data. And he said something very, very interesting at the beginning. Was Snowflake was a simple beast back at the beginning, and a simple product. It just worked, and it's a big product now, as you mentioned, and as new features get added to it, and the simplicity around their charging mechanism, its credits, it is abstracted really away from how you're spending those credits. Are you getting the best value from those credits? And are you being are you making sure you can do things in the cheapest way, and sometimes in the best location? Because sometimes it isn't the right place to do things in Snowflake. Some things could be done outside. So, and I'd be interested if you've got any thoughts on how Iceberg may change some tuning of certain scenarios.
So I'm just getting into Iceberg, right? Okay. So my core expertise is really in the stuff that we know a lot about now that's evolved over time. So Iceberg is coming up, and last week I was looking at it, and I shall do some more. So just to set the context, Snowflake is not an engineering company. Snowflake is a sales company with a fantastically engineered product that they sell. And I think if you assume that Snowflake is an engineering company with a sales arm, you get the wrong perspective, because everything in Snowflake is sales led. Now, what does that mean from a consumer perspective? Well, it means that Snowflake want you to buy more credits. That's their model, right? So how do you mitigate against that approach? What is it that you need to do in order to reduce the cost to the consumer? Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Chris. There's a few, if you'll allow me to waffle on for a few minutes, there's a few things you can do, right? So when you spin up your account, make sure that all your warehouses are set to auto suspend after 60 seconds. Don't leave them at 10 minutes, because you'll be burning credits for nothing. And other things you can do is the first thing that I do is I try and tune the design. And I think that's a really important point, is that if you have feeds coming in from, let's say, 10 different business units, you only want a single warehouse declaration, because each extra small cluster has 8 processing units. So it can handle 8 concurrent loads. But if you had a warehouse declaration for each business unit, you'd effectively have, in this example, 10 times your cost. So don't do that. Use a query tag instead to differentiate your workload, and then you can group your consumption by the query tag rather than use the warehouse. And that was a mistake that I made in the first early days, so I didn't know any different. And then if you've got a development environment or a non-production environment, set the warehouse to be in economy mode. Don't use standard mode, just use standard for production. So those are a couple of tips off the top of my head about tuning your design for your ingest.
So I'm interested in one of those ones was the query tagging. Can you explain that one a little bit more? So does query tag tell you what warehouse to go onto instead?
No, the query tag defines the context. It says you can put a JSON payload in it, but you can effectively say this query was issued by finance, or this query was issued by HR. So if you're doing a chargeback model, the query tag tells you who has issued which query, so that you can get the stats out.
I got you. So it's a common, and the guidance they gave as well from Snowflake is, you have a warehouse for each of your departments.
Right.
And
don't do that.
And the different. I mean, the problem with those, as you say, it's about the concurrency. You're not going to get that concurrency if you're just taking into account your own your own warehouse. I actually saw a product called Espresso, I'm going to say, or it was some sort of coffee name. And they were doing a very sort of thing. They were doing query rerouting to compensate
Right.
where people had of. So it will say, no, you don't want to run that warehouse. Run this one. It's not even being fully utilized. And it would redirect it. And then you probably use the tagging, I think, to. That was my biggest concern. Is
Yeah.
how do you get to recharge it back if you don't know who's
Yeah.
using it? But with
Exactly.
that tagging approach, is a very neat way of knowing who's. There you go. Thank you, JT. Espresso AI. So someone's paying attention.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll look at
So
that.
it was interesting. I mean, there's select dev I've seen out there as well. I mean, they're very much reporting what's going on there. But the thing is you can prevent these situations happening a lot of times. So, quick question about is data when you're looking at the design, but do you focus on the data model that's being used as well?
Data modeling is a really interesting question because I find that most people don't know how to data model nowadays. We've had this conversation, Chris, you and I and many others. So really it comes down to what you're trying to achieve. So there's a system that I'm working on. We have a very high number of concurrent feeds coming in, about 1,500 feeds. So we run into some particular challenges around those, and a single extra small warehouse will work if you set it up correctly and you set your clustering up. So if you imagine you've got 10 clusters, you've got 80 concurrent processes. Not all feeds are going to have data all the time. They don't all arrive at exactly the same time. So you can monitor your workload and your queue depth and all the rest of it and see what the queuing is like so that you don't overload the extra small warehouse. So that's tuning the design. You want to have the minimum number of warehouses running, but still be able to identify your segregated workload.
Yeah.
But one thing that we all do is we all log data. So when a feed starts up, you want to be able to say this feed started at this time, and then it did something else, and we loaded so much data into a staging table or a raw table, then we moved it to an intermediate table into our vault or whatever, and then we exposed it for consumption. Each of those steps we want to record, but if you have a single logging table, essentially you'll serialize your ingest because of the locking and the way the micropartitions work. So what I found was that not many people really understand how micropartitions work.
Yes.
And the
Yeah, it's very
impact
true.
on table, right? So the way we get around the logging issue is to use an event table. I'll accept a small amount of latency for the visibility of the logged information because largely you're not going to respond sub-millisecond. You normally it take 5-10 minutes, realize something's broken because a flag comes up on a console and you go, oh, I'll investigate that, by which time the event table has persisted the data. I know Snowflake are working in this area and there's only one event table for an account. But what we find is in a very, very high concurrency workload situation is the event table works extremely well. And it's a way, as I say, of retaining the parallelization. But sorry.
There's some good questions coming in as well. So the event tables, how would that be structured? I mean, what would that look like?
So the event table is a single table per account.
Right.
And
Okay.
essentially what we do is we deliver a payload, think of a JSON payload effectively into a variant. And that JSON payload has different attributes according to what type of telemetry you're wanting to record. We're getting into the whole telemetry discussion, which is really
Yeah.
interesting in its own right. But let's assume that you've got telemetry from a single, let's say you extract the data at source and you're using a third-party tool. You'd want all the telemetry to go into Snowflake. So you set up your payload to say this is a CSV file from this source at this time. It lands in S3. And by the way, we've got a checksum file as well that looks at the old version of the source object view or table, compares it to the previous extract because you don't want to get caught out by having differences in your targets from your source table. And so you can alert on that. Yes, I know about dynamic schemas and all the rest of it, but I prefer to do things a bit of the old way. And then you can go further with your telemetry. So not just recording the number of rows that are consumed to various parts of your system, but you can also build off the back of that any DORA reporting, because you can look at the timestamps from the original source timestamp through to the point at which the data becomes usable and figure out what the latency is in the system, how long it takes to load the data. And there are other dimensions you can put in as well in a structured, semi-structured way, if you like, so it's reportable using consistent SQL statements, rather than just straightforward logging that takes a whole brain dump of narrative and it's really impossible to draw out the value.
Definitely. I've got a great question from Kent. Hi, Kent. Thanks for tuning in. He wants your opinion. Oh, wrong way around. That's the wrong one. Is this one here? Sorry. There you go. What's your view on using multi-cluster warehouses?
Do you mean different size clusters within a single warehouse? Because if that's what you mean, because I'm not familiar with that.
Oh no, I think he's referring to so auto scaling out. So multi-cluster. So
right.
it spins up when it hits certain top, whichever mode it is. It will hit a certain point. It will go through.
We do use multi-cluster warehouses because it's the only way to scale the ingest. So I'm in favor of them. Now, there's also the ability to tack on extra processors to the warehouses if needed. But we tend not to do that. So we stick within the constraints of the standard warehouses, but we do tend to use extra small for ingest. And John Ryan makes the very good point that you should set the size of your warehouses according to where they are in the data lifecycle. So for ingest, extra small; for curation, medium; and for consumption, probably small warehouses. Now, I'm not talking about high volume, high velocity data here. I'm talking about periodic refreshes, which fit within the constraints of what we have available. But I think it's important to note that we do have options, and I think that scaling out warehouses is a really good feature. Works really well for us.
I've seen it very well used when BI reporting tools. You've got you don't know when you're going to hit that max load when everyone's on there, and it just keeps it consistent. No one complains about any queuing or degradation on performance. Well, unless you hit the 10, you've got to have a lot of users on there at the same time to hit the. But it does happen though. I mean, if you think about it, 10 threads per warehouse. You've only got 100 threads going at the same time. So
it's a little bit lower. It's about 8 threads per warehouse, but which gives you a limit of 80.
Yeah.
But you've also got queuing as well, and a very small amount of queuing is not a bad thing because it means you are maximally loading the warehouse and making it most efficient.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can. You can override the threads. I think at a
yes, you can set the parallelization down. Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah, I mean that getting into a dark art. I think if you start going messing around all the things within it, but maybe that's for another day. There's another question here as well, and I don't. In fact, I can tell you who the user is on my phone. I can't on there because it comes up. This is from Girish Bart, I think. So, can you comment on the impact of overload of native apps versus connected app in Snowflake deployments?
No, I can't comment on that because I don't have any hands-on practical experience of this scenario. So I'd rather not say anything.
Yeah, I'm going to bow out on that one as well. I can't. But what we may do, we may come back to you on that one. I'll ask around and reply on the comments at another stage.
See, the challenge here for me in writing a book is that you have to constrain the contents. Otherwise, it would be like War and Peace. You'd never get finished. And by the time you did finish a book, much of it would be obsolete, out of date. There are already changes that render some of the earlier content in books less valuable than what it was at the time it was written and delivered. So it is a fine point, and staying at the bleeding edge of tech and what Snowflake provide is actually, it's a really hard place to be because there is so much of it now. I remember, sorry, Chris, I remember back in the Oracle days, you could just about know everything about Oracle, right? Back in the early days, back in the 90s. But very quickly it got to the point where you had to specialize, and even the DBAs were specializing in backup and recovery. They would, standard DBA activities, etc., etc. About 5 different specialisms. Snowflake's heading in the same direction.
I agree. I suppose, and it's every. I suppose with this world of simplification,
Yeah.
It's not. We've seemed to have. I think we're going back. I think we simplified a bit too much, and now we need to go. Okay, right, we do need to bring in some of these specialisms again. We talk about a lot of these understanding about micro partitions, explain plans or query profiles as they're called. Understanding how to read them. I don't see many people doing it in Snowflake. If the query's running badly, they'll just stick the warehouse up a bit. And I don't think if people actually do read them, they actually really understand how to change or increase the performance on them, or increase it. I think I joked around is the cost now of these query profiles actually has a real cost now. It's costing you credits, whereas before, the cost of your query in Oracle, it may cost you some street cred when someone sees how bad it is, but it wouldn't actually cost you any real money.
No, that's true. And so the extra dimension here is cost, right? And maximizing the cost benefit is really, really important. Now, it depends, of course, how your organization is run. If it's based upon revenue, then cost probably isn't that important compared to revenue. And some organizations do work in that way. So even if you save costs, it's not noticed, or it may accrue to a different cost center.
Yeah, this is where it's that balancing act of I know this from looking at tuning or looking at poor performing queries for one of our large clients back a few years ago. The cost and time and effort for us to look into a long running query to the saving we'd made on that query if it's only run every month, we've actually lost money because we're expensive. But I think if you and this is the thing is because I suppose we're reacting to the situation that's already there. If we go back and people have read your book, have listened to these shows, have a good understanding of the query profile before it's gone to production. By the time it's going to be less likely you're going to have these long running queries or these poor performant queries on these large bills that don't provide the value from the cost they've cost. And it's working out when's your time to look at a query that's if it's run every hour and it's and you're gonna then you can improve the efficiency by half, then it's probably worth doing because by the end of the month you probably saved enough credits to reimburse the cost of your time doing it. But that's it's hard to work out when to do these things and when not.
There's another dimension here as well, and that is that when you look at a single Snowflake account is one thing. When you're replicating data, the cost of replicating that data can far exceed the cost of curating the data in the first instance. And what we've found is that through practical experience of one fairly large application, is that by restructuring how we store the data, what we find is that we've saved a significant amount of money. We have saved about half the cost of the curation of that data. So that's another design decision. It's something you wouldn't necessarily know immediately, but it's something that transpires through use. And you need a toolkit of techniques to be able to mitigate those issues.
Yeah. So you've mentioned this a few times, and it's a topic that it's always been debated. The role of the architect, and so the word design has come up a few times. And I'm all for designs,
Sure.
and I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. Sometimes when something on there,
Yeah.
and sometimes you without having that sit down, look at design, review it with other people, you're not going to actually get the best. Well, you won't get the best solution unless you do that, because the feedback you can get from that exercise is invaluable, and then you can save so much in the long run of actually putting something into production that is designed, it's
Yeah.
extendable, it's scalable. So the role of the architects, and this is something
Oh, don't get me started. Don't get me
we won't go
started.
too far down that rabbit hole.
Right.
But um, we talk about the different roles within Snowflake now. So do we think there is it's best practice really to have some sort of design phase of what you're doing for a pipeline and have that reviewed, spoken to with your peers, rather than just jumping in feet first?
Yeah, I think there is. Well, I know there is. So for me, right, in some organizations, architects are used as the police. There's the people that like to say no. What they don't,
Oh, sorry.
what architects should be, in my opinion, is advisory and educational. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be a policing function, because you
Right.
don't get the best out of people if you don't educate, right? When you look at the role of an architect in an organization, in my opinion, the architect should know the estate and should own the estate. So when data moves from one platform to another platform, the architect should know what that looks like, and everything should be linked, because you can't map your important business services through your applications if you don't know where the data is going from and going to.
Yeah.
So I think architecture has been subsumed to perform a whole bunch of other functions than what its original intent was. Because way back when, the architects were the gods of the system. They were the ones who sat saying what was permissible, what wasn't permissible. Now
Yeah.
it's a different proposition.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the design of a system, I always start with a picture. I start
Yeah.
on the left and say, my data's coming in here, it's going over to here. What are the things I need to do in order to move that data? And then if I can't describe it in simple terms, I've got something wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Very true.
do want to pick up on Kent's comment as well, because as it
Which one?
flashed up.
This one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sorry. I
yeah,
was trying to like it and I didn't. But yeah, let's put this one up here. Yeah.
yeah. No, absolutely, Ken, you're absolutely right. You can scale up the warehouse rather than scale out. Scaling up gives you double the processors and it gives you double the memory, which we think for a single extra small warehouse is about 20 gigs, subject to confirmation. But the point is that you can double the size of the warehouse and half the runtime, and that's brilliant because the cost is the same. Yeah, and you can get more scalability out of it. So I fully take on board your point. Tuning the SQL, that's a bit no one does. Because if it's
Yeah.
running and it's running faster, who cares? Actually,
Yeah.
I think that's the wrong attitude. And as a seasoned data professional, just like ourselves here, is what I always advocate.
I've got some thoughts on this as well, and it's around that whole FinOps piece as well, and gamifying it. So
Yeah,
the only reason, unless people are told to go and do it, they're not going to go and do it, because there's other cooler stuff to go and do there. But if you're able to gamify it, and you'll say this department here, average cost per rows processed, doing this transformation,
yeah,
they're down at this percentage here. Worst performing team, that's gonna, it's a bit of naming and shaming, but it's gonna go, okay, why is that team not doing as why is the output from that team not as performant as this one? Okay, so let's swap things around, and I think that's the only way of really actually getting people to go and do that. You've got to name and shame, so to speak. And I think the other one is, which is on the same lines, is now we're moving more of this data product, and with query tagging, and you've identified all the data that's associated with this query, with this data product. you're selling that data product, and it's one of those ones that is easy enough that, okay, I'm selling this to a client. They pay me X amount of money a month. Right, what's your margin now? Okay, if you want to increase your margin on that, you need to reduce your costs. How are you going to reduce your costs? You may need to go and tune it. And if you're doing this thing for enough companies, it's worth you tuning it to increase your margin. And your company will make its targets then. You'll get your bonus then. So yeah, we've got to make accountability, and I think
we have. And one thing that I've put in the book is about the client expectations. So there are typically two ways of entitling data. You either bake in the entitlement into the objects that expose the data. That's the simple, easy way that many of us have done for years and years. Or you actually carve out the client-specific data sets where it takes a little longer to curate the data.
Yep.
But you don't navigate the entitlement model every time you query the data, and therefore the client experience is far better. Now, you've got to figure out what the model looks like, what the entitlement model looks like to be able to do that, and how you can simplify it for yourself. But that's something that we've been very successful in doing in the application I'm working on at the moment.
So there was, sorry, I've been going back to some notes I haven't. So telemetry. So telemetry is a favorite, one of my favorite topics. But and you mentioned accounts, global accounts, and I suppose not everyone, unless you're using global accounts and you've got that multi-account strategy, which I think is the norm now. Is what I see. At the beginning it wasn't. Before global accounts, you'd have multiple areas or dev, test, prod carved up in the same account. Different prefixes on the databases, but that's how they were separated. But as soon as you went to that global account, what that did introduce was more complexity around the FinOps aspect, because the org views didn't have everything in it you wanted. So you'd have a lot of your, I suppose, the query tagging stuff, the low level granular stuff definitely doesn't go to the query. Definitely doesn't go to the global. I'm pretty sure it doesn't go into the global the global
org
account views
yet.
The org admin stuff. So you've got this situation where you've now got to piece together all of this telemetry data into one place where you can have that full holistic view. So how have you seen that challenge, and how have you looked to get resolve that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on here, Chris. So the first things that, again, a mistake that I made was to bring dev, test, and UAT into a single account, have a separate account for production, which means that you've got to have different roles because your role strategy then changes. Because if you're in development, you want to have a development role, so you've got to differentiate that role. It means that it's a less natural progression from one environment to another, because they're not containerized in the same way.
Exactly.
One thing that we have seen, and this is a product with some of the security or entitlement tools out there, is a role per user. Well, you want to snarl up your system, do that, right? So we've found that trying to resolve entitlement for an object in a high volume role RBAC model with masking policies, etc., adds such an overhead that it just constrains the system. But you're absolutely right that in a federated or a global environment with multiple accounts in multiple regions, then shuffling the data about is expensive, takes time. Queries will run differently in different organizations, in different parts of the world, because different organizations accessing the same data set with different entitlements, and where clients join the data to their own data sets and to other third-party data sets. Suddenly you're in a world of pain from a performance issue perspective, because you can't segregate which part of the query is actually problematic, because you don't have visibility of that query. You're entirely dependent upon the client giving you an analog for your own data set, because they don't want to obviously disclose their intellectual property.
So you mentioned about we were talking about the role proliferation,
Yeah.
and the scenario you can have is with complex masking policies, and a complex RBAC model as well. You can actually get performance issues when you start having to do it. When you start having to query the account, all the different account tables. So yeah, I think there's no. I'm going to give my consultant reply. It depends. So
Yeah,
there's no one size fits all. And you mentioned also about the user role, and what we have implemented and what we had to because of some limitations back then, was we had to have a user role that maps the user, and then we had all of the different functional roles, technical roles mapped into that one. So
yeah,
because if you're in the same account, you could just swap your role across the user role. This is before secondary roles came in as well. So yeah, I think it's just hard. It's always Snowflake is always expanding and always getting adding complexity, but to
it's
deliver
always a
the
trade-off.
capabilities we need, it is a trade-off. Yeah, definitely.
We found that some of our environments use a single tenant model, so it's one application in that environment. But we do have applications or multiple applications sat in the same account where we have a multi-tenant model.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like that approach, but I can understand why it's done, and there are very good use cases as to why it should be done. But it's just another variant.
Yeah, and I think there's the cost scenarios for these different scenarios. So you can have the multi-tenanted pattern where you've got your data all stacked up on top of each other, using a key, an account key to say, okay, which rows I'm allowed to see.
Yeah.
I suppose that's used with using some sort of BI tool that you've only got modeled once and it's automatically putting it in there. There is an additional security aspect. Maybe you have to have better testing. Because when you put that in there to make sure you're not going to break that security. Flip to the sharding approach, where maybe you're creating different ones. It's simplified a little bit more with dynamic tables, so you can automate the creation of that. So it's not as cumbersome it would have been in the past. But then you've got a limit of how many dynamic tables you can have, and you've got a limit on tagging that can follow it as well. So, yeah.
The dynamic tables introduce their own delay.
Yes. Yep.
So it depends upon what latency your system will tolerate. Now we're talking about a data warehouse, so arguably an hour is fine, right? Nominally, it doesn't matter what the number is, but pick a number. But where you've got regular updates that have to be serviced to the client within an SLA, dynamic tables aren't going to help you that much.
No. Yeah. I think it's more with the creating of shards. So as new customers come along and things like that, you haven't got to do another code drop to go and create those new ones. They would get created dynamically. I believe you're going to give 1,000 per account.
It's increasing. That number, dynamic tables, is going to increase over time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to have I love Snowflake, but it's just sometimes a bit strange. Some of these artificial limitations being put into something that's fully scalable, and it annoys me a bit sometimes. You think, okay, we've got great solution. Oh, I've got to raise the support ticket to go and get it increased from 100 to 1,000 or 1,000. It's the same happens at AWS as well, so I suppose. So.
Just something I did observe right in the last book. It was actually the hardest of the three to write. The reason it was hard is because superficially, Snowflake is actually very simple, very easy to use, etc.
Yeah.
When you scrape the surface and you see what's going on underneath, as much as you ever can, because it's highly restricted as to what you can see, and I don't have any special privileges, but just by probing the behavior, you find that it's an incredibly complex beast.
Mm-hmm.
To make something look so simple is a remarkable feat, but it hides a plethora of complexity that makes it very difficult to understand what's going to happen when sometimes. An example of that is if I create a table at 8 o'clock in the morning and then I drop that table at 9 o'clock in the morning, when does it go to time travel? And then when does it go into fail-safe, right? So if you've got a retention period of a day, if you time travel, you'd expect it to go at 9 o'clock the next morning. Well, that's not the case, because Snowflake don't run their processes
exactly the same
bang
time.
on the microsecond, the next day. So you've got this, and then you've also got the latency within the account usage store views as well, which further prevents visibility. So all you can say is that nominally a day, but it's almost certainly going to be a day plus a bit more. And I happened to prove this during the testing, because I managed to recover an object that was outside of time travel. And I thought, that's interesting. And that's what spurred me to investigate as much as I could. So again, back to your earlier comment, it depends, right? It depends when you're going to do something.
Yeah, it's a good job. Otherwise, the need for consultants like us would be no longer required, and we'd be
don't ever say that.
put it.
I'm not that old yet.
I missed a question earlier, and it was about a query acceleration services.
Yes.
So it was So, what's your experience of working with warehouse with query acceleration?
Oh, hi, Lav. Lav's a friend of mine. I knew he'd ask something.
There you go.
So the only experience I've got is working through an example for the book for QAS. Right? I don't have any great experience other than that. We don't need it. The important point to note: a lot of what I've written is, you can do this, you can do that. Here's an example if you need it. Here's the syntax. Here's how you enable it, etc., etc. It's a toolkit. It's a pick and mix. I've got a list of, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 things to look at when you optimize performance. So QAS is another way of accelerating. The clue's in the name, but remember, you're going to pay for it via serverless compute.
It's free lunch.
That's right. It's a bit like the old, bit like Snowpipe, right? Optimized for 100 to 250 meg files. If you've got lots of really, really small files, suddenly you'll find your cost will increase because it's spinning up the serverless compute, spinning it down again. So again, it depends, right?
Yep.
Your mileage will vary.
Yes, exactly. I've missed. I'm just gonna. There's a message from. A comment from. Was it Mike? Sorry, I'll find it. Sorry. Yeah, Matthew Mullins. So when we're moaning about the data modeling, I've quoted this. Yeah, Hadoop is that little fluffy elephant. He's got a lot to answer for, I tell you, because there's a whole generation that just forgot about data modeling, forgot about a lot of a lot of the architecture stuff that is very relevant nowadays. But luckily, we're still here and as yourself, Matthew, as grumpy old man can still moan and help raise the profile of these things and hopefully bring back a focus on data modeling.
My first job, the first thing I ever did, I was new into IT. I taught myself how to program in C. It was in 1992, and I got a transfer internally into IT in 1993. In my first week, I was given a logical model and told to turn it into a physical model, and I had not got a clue where to start, right? But those kind of experiences, you never forget them. They're foundational. And if you get the foundations right, it will carry you forward. So you're absolutely right that data modeling is a lost art, and we really need to get back to it because it will solve an awful lot of our problems if we do it properly.
Yeah, well, Joe Reese's mission at the moment is to do that with his book he's writing. So I'm not sure the title's going to be, but I've seen the first couple of chapters are bang on and definitely what's needed. So we're approaching the hour, and I think we've answered any questions. Is there for the audience? You're going to be at Big Data London? People find you there?
Yeah, I think I'll come along. I've not been asked to speak yet, but I may be. I don't know.
Would you like to speak at my my theatre I've got in the evening? There you go. Right,
yes,
there you go. You got your first offer now.
Thank you.
No worries.
Ken, I'm flattered that you joined the call and asked questions about warehousing, and I kind of feel I fluffed it a little. Let me just give some thoughts. So there are products in the marketplace that I'm not too enamored with, which dynamically resize warehouses, right? And yes, you'll save money. You know this, Kent, better than I do, right? But you'll save money, but actually I think it misses the issue I'm trying to nail here by a country mile. Because first of all, and I think most of us here would agree that optimal SQL is the gold standard. We must tune our code before we deliver it. And bolting in a tool that resizes warehouses dynamically, not always guaranteed to hit the mark, particularly if you have multiple workloads on the same warehouse declaration.
It's
So
sticky
just
back plastic.
caution against it. Yeah,
Yeah, sticky back
I
plastic
think
on the
it's
problem.
yeah. I don't think it's an appropriate solution.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so if anyone wants to reach out to you, how will they find you?
Well, they'll find me at originalcaruso@gmail.com. That's my personal email address. I can give you that, Chris, but original as in original Caruso, Caruso @gmail.com. You can catch me at andrew.carruthers @lseg.com. Other than that, through yourself, Chris.
All right, or LinkedIn.
Not,
I'm sure I can
not
contact
LinkedIn,
you on
yeah.
that.
Not that I want you to be my secretary. You understand?
I know that. And I have put some links to your book, so anyone listening,
Very
the
kind.
links are in there. I am going to be purchasing the latest one anyway, because there's some things that I think will be interesting. I put it on the bookshelf in the office, which to encourage all of the staff to look at these things as well. So you'll be making it onto our company bookshelf very shortly.
Brilliant, thank you.
In fact, Soul tuned in. Soul's book's already on there, and I'm halfway through it, so
Great.
I've got a few other things going on. But cool. Well, we'll probably call this a wrap then. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Some great questions, some great insights, Andrew. As always, I was glad that this time our conversation was shared with others. Normally, I get the luxury of having them over a beer at a different event. So yeah, thank you for sharing your some valuable insights with everyone. Next week I have Romana is on the show. She's been a long time follower. I've been trying to get on the show for a little while, so I'm not sure what the topic is yet though, but we'll have something good. So yeah, tune in for that one. Okay, we'll call it a wrap. Well, thanks everyone.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.